I'm back. We were just giving an overview in the last lecture, uh, part one on environmentalism or ecologism, um, an overview of an attempt at a philosophy of ecologism by this guy Ness, Naess, um, and I kind of gave a summary of the argument. Now I want to proceed to some analysis. Um, and want to start this out by looking at some classical alternatives to the approach here. So let's start with um, where a lot of environmentalists take as a kind of counterpoint, and that is the biblical version of uh, of man's relation to nature in the book of Genesis. Uh, in the book of Genesis, it says that they're there in the garden, paradisical garden, um, after being created, and it says God gave dominion. God gave man dominion to the earth uh, to subdue it. Those are dominion and subdue are exact words there. Now, leftists, um, leftist environmentalists in particular here, have read the account of Adam and Eve, this account of uh, giving man dominion as patriarchal. First of all, I mean, uh, Eve is subordinate to Adam, um, but also Adam is given. It's kind of made the father of mankind, if you will. So it's patriarchal and it's tyrannical in the anarchist sense of tyrannical. Implies conquest of nature, to use the liberal term, and exploitation of nature, to use the Marxist term, right? Um, but I think the biblical intention is different, and I'll just run through a few things here to clarify, to give a more something something less of a straw man alternative, and something that is full blooded. So, in context, I think in the book of Genesis, the language is not meant to suggest any of what I just said, the leftist reading. Um, First of all, in terms of patriarchy, in the text, if you look at the exact wording of the text, God's statement giving dominion is to them, not to him, right? To them, Adam and Eve, right? So they're supposed to jointly exercise dominion. Um, but in terms of this dominion, Adam is presented as having an intimate relationship with the animals. God brings all the animals before him. He names them, right? This doesn't look like an exploitive relationship. And in fact, he and Eve are both vegetarians, right? That's clear in the account. And they don't even wear clothes. I mean, so there's uh, their relationship to the environment so far in in paradise is that go reach out, grab fruit off trees, and the paradise is um, sort of self watering. Water comes up from the ground and stuff like this, and this in this account, uh, and so you know, it, we don't have any whiff of a kind of brutal conquest and exploitation of nature here. Um, it's only after they're cursed that some of um, these negative perceptions come through. So after they disobey God, uh, Adam and Eve are cursed. Adam is cursed to work the ground, the soil, implying that before, whatever his dominion was going to consist of, it did not involve working the ground, right? So they wouldn't be tearing up the earth and all of this stuff. Um, and then the at least according to the original plan, right? And in the garden, the woman had not been cursed to be submissive to man. That was that was part of the curse. She was the the curse was that she would be subordinate to man, and so that was not as a curse. That was not meant as an ideal, right? It was meant as a sad um, prediction of where things would go. Is evil brought about by disordered passions uh, is fairly clear from the account. Um, and they haven't it's not until the curse that they're going to have to depend on food for animals for food, right? And then on top of all that, the presentation is God created everything good. It repeats again and again everything that God made. You know, the land and the sea and the sun, moon, and stars, and the animals creeping on the ground and the fish swimming in the sea. I mean, God, every one of them, God says, this is good. So nature is presented as in a very positive way, I think, in in the book of Genesis, and just doesn't read true to read dominion the way those leftist critics are reading it. And if you look at how Jews and Christians have traditionally thought about dominion, they've thought about it in terms of caretaking, stewardship. Uh, God has given them the earth, and they owe it to God to use this gift wisely, right? Um, so so that points to one problem is that this is true of a lot of modern ideologies that they look at uh, you know ancient writings, and more or less everything that came before them as uh, radically deficient, and it's probably because they don't really take it seriously and try to learn anything from it. But and then there's if you look at the classical Christian tradition, classical meaning going back to the ancient Greeks and continuing through um, birth of Christianity, the Middle Ages, onto fairly recent times, the conception of human beings was that they're part of an interconnected chain of being. That term chain of being was sometimes used. Order of being is often used. Uh, and they understood the human being to participate in the whole chain at all levels, um, and even to be constituted by those levels of being. So that one thinker said that man is an epitome of being. That is, he incorporates himself all levels of being. Right. So let me read you a classic formulation by St. Augustine, writing back in the 400s AD or CE, if you want to use Common Era. But here's his formulation. It's quite striking. A little bit of a long quote, so bear with me. But I think it's very illuminating. Augustine says, "The one all-powerful God, creator and maker of every soul and body, the God who bestows not vain but true happiness by allowing people to participate in himself." Participate is an important word for these guys. To participate in himself, who made man a rational animal with soul and body, who, when man sinned, neither allowed man to go unpunished, nor abandoned him without mercy, who gave to both the good and the evil being, gave to them being, which they share with stones, and vegetable life, shared with trees, and the sensitive life, shared with the beasts, and the intellectual life, shared with the angels alone. You see, participating in every level of being, right? From the uh, from the inanimate, non-organic stones, what your hair falls out in your fingernails, right? Um, Vegetative life, the circulatory system, the digestive system, so forth. Sensitive life, feeling, sensations, and then intellectual life. Human beings partake in all of this. Um, so it's very much a picture of human beings being embedded in a kind of web of being, right? Um, from whom, again, speaking of God's creation of the order here, from whom is every kind, every species, every order, from whom is everything having existence in nature of whatever kind and value, who gave also to flesh its origin, beauty, health, fertility, disposition of parts, healthy balance, who also gave to the non intellective soul memory, sense, appetite, and to the rational soul, in addition to these, mind, intelligence, and will, who has not neglected to give not only to the heavens and the earth, not only to the angels and men, but even to the entrails of the lowest, feeblest creature, to the bird's pin feather, to the plant's tiny flower, and to the tree's leaf, a harmony of its parts and a certain peace. That's extraordinary, right? Uh, Extraordinarily rich conception of the natural world, and how all of its parts can be harmonious. He uses the term harmony, balanced. Um, Man participates in this, right? He ends, never should this God who made all this stuff and made it this way, never should this God be thought to have wanted the kingdoms of human beings and their dominations and servitudes to be alien from the laws of his providence. In other words, they're ultimately not going to get their way with whatever they want. Ultimately, God will hold them all accountable. And incidentally, Augustine was sharply critical of human dominations. If you read A City of God, this is the lust for domination is the root of sin for Augustine. So here's a pretty sophisticated conception of the world that is very much in harmony with an idea of of a certain idea of environmentalism that puts environmentalism uh, in its place, so to speak. Come back to that. In terms of the theory of justice, Ness's theory of justice, um, the language of rights, the application of rights to non-human creatures, I think is problematic because the notion of rights uh, implies claims. Um, you know, I have a claim to your treating me a certain way, right? And this implies a rational consciousness. Um, we have a similar problem here, speaking of the unborn's right to life. I think, I mean, I, I think, I think you can talk about obligations to plants, animals, to the child in the womb, but the language of rights is not quite adequate for this, right? And so I think you need a more adequate moral language to do justice to the obligations involved in all of this. And I mean, in fairness, most modern thinkers have done this. You know, we fall back on the language of rights, sort of the best language we have. But that doesn't mean it's very precise and always helpful. Um, and then Ness lacks a scale of values, right? He explicitly rejects this classical order of hierarchical order of being that I just uh, showed you in the quote from Augustine. Um, he explicitly rejects ranking things. I'm quoting, ranking things according to their relative intrinsic value, because he doesn't think they have different intrinsic values. Right? He explicitly rejects the idea of an eternal soul. That's the term he uses. He rejects the primacy of reason. He rejects the priority of conscious beings over those which lack consciousness. And he rejects even the priority of more highly evolved animals over less evolved animals. Um, so, but the problem with this is, without a scale of values, um, you don't have any basis on which to prioritize goods. I mean, we can't have everything we want in life. The whole point of norms limiting our behaviors is that we can't get everything we want without destroying others. Even if we did destroy others, we couldn't get everything we want. But right, uh, don't you need a scale of values to prioritize, to know what should go where in your priorities, right? And then there's an element, a strong element in this kind of thinking that Ness manifests of dehumanization. I mean, all the things Ness rejects here are precisely the things that were traditionally understood to be the basis of human dignity and indeed the very essence of humanity. So it's therefore not surprising that he leans toward a rejection of the primacy of humanity in relation to other organisms, right? He suggests that human beings might eventually have to abdicate, the word he uses, their leading role, though perhaps only to the kind of superior alien beings he imagines in the thought experiment that he does. But so he's moving in this direction of rejecting the primacy of humanity, because after all he's undercut all of the reasons that are ever given for giving priority to humanity, right? And some radical environmentalists putting this diminishment of humanity together with the grievance about human exploitation of nature have taken this line of thinking to its logical extreme, which is that human beings are a parasite and a disease on the earth that deserves to be exterminated. You actually have some people talking that way. So we move towards actually a diminishing of human rights that people have struggled so hard to increase and achieve. I'll give you a personal example. When I was a grad student at LSU, I saw a flyer for a presentation that was going to be on campus, and the title of the presentation was "The Sexual Politics of Meat," MEAT. And I thought, that sounds too weird to miss. I thought, well, this is the kind of thing I've read about, these kind of radical, ideas that I've read about, and I want to go check this out. So I went, and they gave it was about sexual abuse of some animals by others. So they brought out some human publications that would sort of pornographic look at animals, and then they talked about the roosters raping the chickens in the factory farms, and so this stuff was, to me, really out there. But in the question and answer time, I'm originally from Texas, and at the time, I don't know how it is now, but at the time, there was an exploding deer population, and it was becoming a real problem, and they were trying to find ways to cull the herds, allowing for loosening restrictions on hunting deer and that kind of thing. So I raised this up, and I presented the question as, aren't there some things we have to do to control animal populations so that they don't, in a case where they might start hurting us? And she said that she thought that was the woman who responded. There's several there. The woman who responded said that was specious attitude. At first, I thought she meant specious, like SPECIOUS, which means sort of a false, like superficial argument. But she meant SPECIST, speciest, meaning I favor the human species over other species. And indeed I did, and continue to do so. This was pushing it to the limit, and it was talking about how, basically, there are good reasons to, maybe for humane reasons, uh, not to support the kind of factory farming they were talking about. Chickens literally living on top of each other and defecating on each other, and just really horrible conditions. Whatever life they had must have been a lot of suffering. And I think talking about regulating that kind of thing is, makes sense. It's a good thing, and maybe we do have some obligation to animals to minimize their pain and suffering. But they're clearly, we were the bad guys. The human beings were sort of the bad guys. And anyway, so I think you end up with, here's my last thought. What emerges here is, it looks like what Vogelin called political religion. We've been using Vogelin to help us with his ideas about how ideology works and everything. Of course, he had said that modern ideologies in general are political religions, in the sense that they're kind of substitutes for the vacuum, substitutes for Christianity in the vacuum of meaning after Christianity broke down in Europe and so forth. But consider some of the points in Ness, and I think you may agree that this Vogelin's analysis applies pretty well here. So so first of all, there's this service to the great self, right? Self with a capital S. This is the ecosystem, right? But it sounds a lot like serving God, right? It sounds religious, and it sounds like some new version of Spinozan pantheism, right? And there also seems to be, and this seems to be the case in a lot of radical environmentalism, a recrudescence of paganism. Prior to Christianity, the religions were polytheistic, right? And the whole world was populated with gods. There was a god for everything, right? And Vogelin had said about one of the effects of Christianity was de-divinizing the world, right? I mean, so it was depopulated of all these gods. I mean, there was one God, right? And I think one way you can look at this is kind of a re-divinization of the world. Think about, it's some environmentalists are explicit about this, and sort of Gaia, Mother Earth, right? It's kind of God, this kind of things. If it's not intentionally religious, it has a very strong religious vibe, kind of a mysticism about it. And of course, Vogelin would say, in making the ecosystem, essentially a replacement for God, he is decapitating being, right? That was Vogelin's term. Establishing a new sacred center. So the ecosphere is the ground of human existence and identity, right? Not God, the ecosystem, right? And out of this come new symbols of meaning, right? Like ecospheric belonging, right? And stuff like that. But you have a loss of the ennobling transcendent meaning, a meaning beyond ourselves, beyond the solar system, the universe, is transcendent, right? And this a connection to something this great, certainly it certainly gives you special status, but he cuts that all off, right? And then you have the what Vogelin calls the immanentization of the eschaton, right? The eschaton, the Christian eschaton, the final end of history is supposed to result in the salvation of mankind, final salvation of mankind and the transformation of reality, back to perfection. Immanent meaning this worldly, the immanentization of the eschaton, bringing the goal of history down into this world to be achieved by ourselves as opposed to God. Uh, uh, Ness presents this historical process as an unfolding of the potentialities of life implicitly towards an ultimate fulfillment in what Vogelin called an inner-worldly community, right? Heaven on earth. The ecosphere is, by definition, an inner-worldly community, right? It's very much along the lines of the pagan cosmos, right? That was Plato made this breakthrough to talk about a reality that transcended the cosmos and was the source of existence for the cosmos, right? That was the divine good, transcendent like that. Now, now you have a return of cosmic thinking, right? Now, from Vogelin's perspective, there's elements of truth in this in Ness's theory, and I've suggested that with almost all of these ideologies, but not all of them, you can find certainly kernels of truth. They've got to touch down in reality somewhere to have any compelling appeal to anyone, right? And this interconnectedness of being and corresponding obligations is, it seems to me, Ness is on to something. And I told you about the hierarchical structure of being suggested by Augustine, who was building on the classical tradition before him. Vogelin talks about this interconnectedness in terms of the word he uses is consubstantiality. We're consubstantial with all being in terms of the human place in the natural world and in the universe and in the divine presence. We are consubstantial with that being, meaning our substance is not entirely separate from the substance of all the things around. We are substantive with that reality. So it's similar to what Ness is saying in terms of we're not absorbed into it. We remain separate beings. We don't become God. It's not pantheism. We're not literally absorbed into nature or whatever, but we are. There are seamless connections between, all elements of life, and Vogelin uses the classical term for human interaction with this larger order of being as participation, right? And most importantly for Vogelin is participation in the divine, right? In this whole structure of being and all those levels of of being, man participates. The most important participation is in the divine, and so Aristotle had a technical term for this that was revealing. He called it metalepsis, M-E-T-A, meta, lepsis, L-E-P-S-I-S, and it meant mutual participation. So it was God was more impersonal being, distant being for Aristotle, but he had an idea of that when we engage in noetic thinking and the use of reason, which um, at its highest level was oriented towards the divine, we kind of participate in the divine mind. We think God's thoughts, so to speak, and this is a mutual participation, right? So God participating in us, we're participating in God. We're not the same. We don't become God. God doesn't become us, but we have this exchange, right? Um, and Christianity brought a more personal dimension to this. It was mutual participation between persons, right? Um, and the Christians developed the idea in terms of uh, the 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 trio of faith, hope, and love. So faith was responsiveness to an experience of uh, uh, divine, the pull of the divine, um, including our minds and our spirits. This awakened great hope. This experience of faith awakens hope, and that hope leads to love for what it is that is drawing us, and so forth. And this is how they talked about participation in God. The classical thinkers, Christian thinkers, Augustine and Aquinas, talked about these as spiritual virtues. There were natural virtues, like the kind the Greeks talked about. The fundamental ones for them were wisdom, uh, courage, moderation, and justice. But these three, faith, hope, and love, were spiritual virtues, as I said, sort of infused by God, or wrought in us by God, um, with our responsiveness to Him. Um, so and you can think all that through for yourself and determine what you think about it. But my point is, it seems to me that Ness and like-minded environmentalists are having a true experience of something deep. Um, the problem uh, the problem is that in cutting themselves off from transcendence, they cut themselves off from ultimate meaning and the source of order, at least as understood before. And if nothing else, the older conception seems richer. Um, it's certainly more ennobling, um, and is the basis for priority of the human being over other animals, while still animals and plants and the rest of the natural world, while still treating that world as something in which we participate, in which we are seamlessly connected, right, and which we have obligations to. Um, so I'd say, the philosophical task related to uh, the ecosphere, if you want to call it that, we're talking about the natural world, is to recover a living connection with the order of being, right? Only with a sense of an order of being can you determine a scale of values by which to determine your priorities. And I think, I I'm I'm I find Boeglen's argument compelling that unless there is sort of a divine being at the top of this structure, that uh, the the clarity about the scale of values, um, and understanding the priorities, uh, ultimately is incoherent. Um, so, there has to be a highest good. What is that highest good, right? Um, and if it means if it's faithful to our intuitions about our obligations, not only to ourselves but to the whole world, then then that has to be something higher than, say, human reason or the ecosphere. Uh, worth thinking about. And then recovering a sense of that connection to the order of being, but also working out our corresponding obligations to the various dimension of being. Uh, I think I find Ness compelling on the point that we have obligations to this larger world, but um, what is the nature of that larger world, right? Uh, if there's no structure, I don't see how we come up with no structure of intrinsic value. I don't see how we come up with a real workable theory of justice. Okay, those are my thoughts, and that's it for environmentalism. I will next time I see you, we'll start on Islamism.